like to welcome all of you to today's seminar, which is sponsored by Searchlight Seminars, and I'm glad that all of you could make it here. Many of you have seen Dr. Mackay before, and you know the kind of treat that we're all in for. Please join me in welcoming Dr. James Mackay.
I guess I had better speak. Though, frankly, I would prefer not speaking. When Pascal invited me to consider with you some of the issues of spirituality and childhood, he said, would it be possible to suggest any topics that you might actually discuss? Or would that be pushing for too much organization? Neither of us knew. I was thinking the issues of being a parent, being a child, and somehow attempting to establish an environment by which human growth can serve as a nutritional background for the emergence of a divine being. Those issues are hard ones. I have discussed some of them with some of the leading experts in the Western world. And I have often discussed them not from an academic perspective or from a professional perspective, professional-scientific perspective, but from a puzzling, deeply intimate perspective of some of the people involved who are regarded by the world as being the experts in these fields. Mostly, I've never spoken much about that. Today I'm going to. Those of you who would be familiar with contemporary Western psychology and psychiatry would be very familiar with the name Sigmund Freud. Those of you who would specialize in child development or child psychiatry would know that Sigmund Freud's genius at least as it applies to children, was reinforced and articulated by a very gifted and devoted daughter of his, Anna Freud. Anna Freud, a perfectly lovely woman. She has individually trained most of the leaders in child therapy and child psychiatry in the Western world. Some years ago, Miss Freud, then in her 80s, published a kind of summary book, which many of you would know, on profiles of child development. A friend of mine called me and asked me if I might spend a weekend with Miss Freud. And I spent part of the weekend with her in the United States. When we met, this world expert, this grand lady, said to me, "Oh, Jim, there are so many issues I hope we'll have a chance to discuss. Children are such a puzzle to me." She said, there are a set of things that I have worked my entire life on. And my life won't last much longer. And I would like to summarize what I have studied. But I have files and folders and partially written papers which I cannot finish because I am too ignorant. She said, for example, I don't understand how you can work with some of these slum children. She said, I understand very fully the psychological principles of ego formation. And I have seen and interviewed and tried to work with some of these children. I don't know what you hang on to. She said, where do their qualities, where do their dimensions of growth come from? They can't come from this kind of world that they live in. And I don't understand it at all. Where does their strength come from? Some have great strength. She said, and people have begged me to write a book on child heroes. She said, you know, I've studied heroic children for my entire life. Every time I learn of a child who has engaged himself in some heroic act, either I go to him or one of my students brings that child to me, and I try to understand that act of heroism that suddenly that child was capable of the most extraordinary feats of selflessness, daring, courage, wisdom. And I have studied these children, Jim, and I can't find where it comes from. Some of them come from miserable homes. Some of them act most of the time as if they had none of those qualities at all, but suddenly, bingo, it's there. Where does it come from? She said, if I understood that, and some of these other issues, and she said, I would be so happy. So we talked for the weekend. But I'm afraid I wasn't able to help Miss Freud with a very consummate and articulated understanding of the issues that she raised. So many of the puzzles that afflict professionals in their understanding of important dimensions, both psychological and spiritual, that affect children of all ages, are not well articulated by the most advanced formulations offered in any scientific or child development scheme of our age. Nor are they offered by most standard forms of psychotherapy. Recently, a man came to see me. This man has spent, this is a very mature man, and he has spent a life in public service. He's a behind-the-scenes diplomat. Power was his apprenticeship. He said to me, Jim, I'm so glad that you know so many of the people and the approaches of the psychoanalytic and psychiatric movement of my time, of our time. It makes it easy to talk with you. Because, of course, I've been in therapy with every single expert of our time. And we went, and I know many of the people who he has worked with. Many of them were some of them at least, were close friends of mine. This man said to me, this man was raised in the household. Into this household came the power of the world. growing up in this environment, he learned a great deal about power. He said to me, "You know, Jim, one of the things that I have found in my work with professionals during my lifetime is that they seem to have an understanding of love, a certain understanding of love, but none of them knows anything about power." He said, "So I tried to learn about love from them. And they tried to learn about power from me. He said, but I don't know that any of us that really finished our work. He said, we always got stalemated. I said to him, well, the reason you got stalemated is very simple. Power and love are the same thing. They're integrated. It is not possible to develop in your ability with love if you do not balance in your ability with power and force. And it is not possible to use power and force in human development without balancing it at every turn with an increase in the ability and levels of love. He said, why don't psychologists know that? And I said, they're not ready. I could not talk with him as I am going to talk with you this morning about power, force, love, harmony, parenthood, childhood, and its background. One of the, I think, as a takeoff point, I will speak about a little bit more about this man who was raised in the household of one of the power centers of the world. He had worked in psychoanalysis and in personal understanding and in apprenticeships of many kind on the issue of success. How is success reckoned? If you took a poll, people would say, well, they're rich and influential and brilliant, and the organizational framework of the nation, a powerful nation, goes through their hands. And in turn, the world, the balance of power in the world, goes directly through their hands. I don't know, you could argue about success. A lot of people would think that would be successful. He thought it was. They did. And he worried, why was he not? And why did he not become a leader of one of the great nations of the world. Because if that's the standard of achievement, very few people are going to have a chance at it this go-around. And he was led to believe that he should have a chance at it. He thought that. He worked very hard on achieving it, but he failed. He failed. I said to him, well, the reason you failed is because you are too mature to get involved in those children's playthings. You know, you've done that a lot before. It's time for you to have a chance to learn more important things. He said, well, I tried to learn everything, but I was blocked at every step of the way from final achievement. He said, so finally it occurred to me that I found myself increasingly learning only one thing. And that is so deep and precious to me that I have been even unable to speak about it to anyone. But it is God. I said, how long have you known that this was the center of your life? He said, it's hard to say. Maybe the last half of my life. He said the first half was spent unsuccessfully in trying to learn about love. So I seem to have given it up and learned instead about God. I said, well, it took you a long time. He said, it sure did. But it seems as if I had to work at understanding all of those things before. And he said, and what I did was to search out the experts of the world, to pair their expert guidance with my own ability to understand it, so that I did understand and work with their guidance. But then I found it didn't work. And I was just dumped in the sea of God to try to understand. He said it's been very miserable, this sea of God, to try and understand. He said, because I have followed this internal preoccupation and spoken of it a little bit over the years to a few of my intimate friends, and they have always acquainted me with prominent clergymen. He said, I was invited as a guest lecturer and as a resident scholar once at the most prominent school of divinity in the Western world. I was to share my understanding of God with those figures. He said it was the worst jail sentence that I could imagine in the whole of political history. There was not one word, he said, during that entire time that I could really speak. I said to him, well, you mustn't think it's a waste because it took you 35 to 42 years to have it clearly in your head and heart. Probably it's taken you several million incarnations to earn the right to have it in your head and heart as fully as you have it for the rest of this very productive life. He said, do you mean I haven't failed? I said to him, failure is terribly important. In order to learn anything, you really have to be a distinguished failure. Several years ago, a man came to see me, dizzy-eyed and glazed from India. And he said, oh, it's so wonderful to find my way to your door. He said, this must be the threshold of total failure. And he told me about his purposeful and energetic life. He was born in a great many he was born into a set of circumstances that many people would consider difficult. His mother tried to kill his father, more than once, came close to succeeding more than once. The house was burned down more than once. He was put into an orphanage and sent off to live with relatives more than once. When finally he was able to reestablish a tie with his parent, it was with his father, who was at that time dying of cancer and needed special treatment. And he, as a young man, a child, 9 or 11, nursed and took care of this dying man. He had worked hard at school, studied hard, worked hard at many jobs, couldn't find the right one or one that would seem to take him up the corporate ladder. He had, or even the academic ladder. He had tried and tried and tried. And his life, from the perspective of a textbook in child psychology, would have sounded like the worst kind of a collective blight that could ever descend on a human being. Do you know what he said to me? what a wonderful life I've had. How could I have been so privileged? He said, how could I have been so privileged to understand the beauty of life, the valiant attempts that people who love you make, and the underlying principles that provide for each of us a fresh apprenticeship for understanding God's world. He said, I fall on my knees in deep appreciation for this full life, so filled as it has been with God's love. This man is not schizophrenic. He's a very, very able person. He works very hard and successfully in a most understanding way. Do you know what he thinks? He thinks he has good karma. Do you know that he does? People have the most peculiar idea about good and bad karma. It has nothing at all to do with the prescription of challenges that you face in life. Nothing. It has everything to do with the potential for understanding that it brings to life. That is the difference between good and bad karma. Not your income, not the shape of your nose, not your manners or dialect. This man I just described to you, who arrived at the threshold of my door, to spend a week, had a particularly spiritual childhood. Now, what in the world could I mean by that? I am about to tell you. Get out the note paper. Now we organize a few things. This all has to do with the process of childhood and learning and parenting that comes that is characteristic of spiritual aspirants. If all goes well, they will face terrible disasters. If their karma is rich and good, they will be obliged to deal with the most difficult human problems. And do you know, when they finished dealing with the difficult human problems of murder, assault, political and individual treachery, power and dominance, slavery and enslavement, when they have worked through the way all those things are done in the world, then their big challenges come. Because then it doesn't matter too much what's going on in the world. What goes on inside carries with it the murderously assaultive feelings and challenges and difficulties. I'm going to interrupt the clear organization of this presentation. to throw in a footnote item. As I was riding on a plane from the East Coast here, there was a film which afflicted us all. Right in the center there, where you had to catch it from your peripheral vision, or else close your eyes. And this film flickered and went on, and then I saw something else. The film was gratefully over, and there was a short. And the short was very, very beautiful. It was a short of the Olympic teams, and it showed in slow motion the champions of the world doing their most difficult feats. And one watched the beauty of their control, tension, release of energy, in bodies that had been prepared often for lifetimes to allow them to do this. And one watched the strain and watched the precision of a beautifully turned gyration. And one knew that these people had spent this entire life and that they were coached by experts, and to learn to handle their muscles, to accomplish these ordeals, and to do them, and to summon all of the tension, energy, and force for that athletic performance. And I found myself thinking, what a happy beginning. What a happy beginning and apprenticeship for future athletic bouts that will require muscle and force and dedication and tension and lifetime after lifetime for people to earn the right to use fully the muscle, the living fiber of their larger being. I found myself thinking, if spiritual students could look at this on the outside, this where it is clear that, that these muscles are used and this energy is used and this kind of a life has to be led and these kind of exercises have to be done just in order to do this out here, and had any idea of what had to be done in here before they would have developed the necessary muscle strength, the necessary tissue nutrition to expand and hold on this plane their larger being. If they could think of it that way, I thought to myself, they would understand some of the purposes, some of the necessary discipline, some of the difficulty that is involved before one can use those muscles in perfect balance. Because you see, the muscles are real. And it is God's design that all of you hold those full muscles of your entire development while you are incarnate, and that you accomplish lifetime after lifetime after lifetime of developing those muscles and holding them here and going through that intense Olympic training by which you are strong enough to climb God's mountain. It's like that. The inner processes, which have been given a poetic name in mystical writing, are strong athletic contests, and developing the strength for those, for survival in those athletic contests, is the subject matter of real human development. And it requires more strength, more discipline, more balance, and greater dedication of purpose than you will ever see with someone whose major skill is to demonstrate that in Olympian championships in this world. And when it is done, it will be so skillfully done that it will draw no attention at all to itself. I would like to quickly review a certain kind of process which engages the heart and thought and life pattern of every person here. It is the process of personal karma for an individual lifetime. I think people here must fully understand that human development is achieved by human beings living in every possible circumstance of psychological, sociological, and religious life. That human beings must complete a complete apprenticeship in all the possibilities of human experience before they know enough to begin to integrate that learning in awareness and life patterns and a pattern of consciousness which gradually begins to take them back to God. It's very difficult for people to understand and to reckon the perspective that what they are, what they think of themselves in this life is a tiny fragment of their whole, a tiny but necessary prism lens by which the energy of life is focused a certain way into their being, and the energy of their inner being is focused a certain way back into life. But one of the reasons why it is necessary to have completed this apprenticeship in all possible facets is that of life, before you start your way back, is that it is in that way that you gather energy. It is in that way that your life experience is coded in the form of crystallized energy of a human being, and it's held in your total being. You therefore gather energy during your entire round of possible experiences as a human being. The reason you can't swiftly return to God is that you have to be able to have the energy to propel that journey. Now that energy to propel that journey is already coded in your consciousness. Let me see if I can speak of that a little bit. You see, human beings, if you look at mankind today, from a spiritual perspective, he seems a pretty archaic ape. At the very most, a kind of dazzling adolescent. Afflicted with a set of values and perspectives that certainly don't seem to honor very highly what people would like to honor very highly in their understanding of God and their purpose here. There is a great gap. Well, consider that mankind has been around this and related planets, working things out for millions of years. And if he is like this today, what might he have been like 12 million years ago? If this is his collective advancement, what was he like before? He was very energetic. One of the points here is that all people must have in their background tremendous power and force of primitive or primitive is a way of saying it. By primitive, I simply mean limited understanding, limited purpose, limited goal. And he must fill those limited boundaries of ideas with the most powerful experience. He must do that in limited ways to match a then limited understanding. And he must be, as Meher Baba has outlined, and every other spiritual leader before has outlined, as Meher Baba has taught and taught and taught. The learning for that is now this way, now that way, back and forth over extremes of balance. And always extremes. Always extremes. Mankind don't learn easily. The extremes furnish the pattern of full emotionality and energy and lock them in a limited perspective, in a limited life that has in it, individually, extremely restricted knowing. But when you put all of them together, it is powerfully broad knowing. And when the boundaries of those limited lives, accomplished with force and power and short-sighted principles and zealous energy of sex and power and God, boy, those boundaries of life contain dynamite. And they should. They should contain dynamite. They have, because many, many, many kinds of explosions and built-in power are needed to propel life and consciousness back when the energy of those lives is released and funneled in a total system which, in the course of those millions of years and millions of lives, has learned a lot more. And then those powerful explosions go through the refinement of being, and that powerful energy is released, purified, in the ways that human beings have spent millions of lives learning, and now they use that dynamite in powering their further growth towards God. Okay. These businesses of human beings are meant to have had the most dramatic and powerful and limiting and limited experiences in creation. That's how they collect energy. That's how they begin to collect understanding. And how can they use that raw energy for understanding higher things and awareness if they don't have it? They have to have it. And it is coded in the being of every person. So, when it is said that you must have experienced and wound every human experience, do you know that's right? And those human experiences are very, very powerful. And they are of every kind. And they must have been. It was divinely ordained that you be murderous. It was divinely ordained that you not be able to initially handle power. It was divinely ordained that you should have had a limited intellect. It was divinely ordained that you gradually learn. That is a way of gathering power. There is crystallized energy in every human being's total experience, which must be melted to provide the nuclear force for expanded understanding of higher learning. There is a physics to this, and some people know the physics. At any rate, spiritual students must have tremendous internal power and force. They must have. They have to have. There is no way that an understanding of God can be accomplished without tremendous love. So I wanted to make sure that it was understood that all people, before they get engaged in the business of unwinding, which is the business of spiritual aspirants, have inclined to wind every possible thing and have coded in the energy of the Sanskaric threads of their total being all of that energy, experience, and limited knowing. Now, in a spiritual life, it is necessary to release that energy. It is necessary to release it. And it is necessary, therefore, to experience it. And how is it experienced? I heard a tape before I came here by Dick Watson. It's a delightful tape on Aurobindo. It was charming. I didn't hear the second tape, but I heard the first one. And many of you here, I think, would have heard that. And those of you who haven't, I will just quickly review and say it was a delightful discussion of an introduction to many facets of Sri Aurobindo Ghosh's life, as certainly one of the most profoundly inspired and inspiring spiritual leader of our time. But Aurobindo said what I am about to say in a very simple way.